I still remember the night my own daughter threw me out of her house. Not quietly, not with tears. She made it a public humiliation. It was her husband's birthday. Neighbors gathered in the backyard, lights strung up, music playing. Everyone laughed, glasses clinking. Then she raised her voice. "Mom, enough is enough. You've been living here for months, eating our food, not contributing a dime. You're just another mouth to feed." The laughter died instantly. Every head turned, her words cut sharper than a knife. I froze, holding the plate of cake I had just served. My hands trembled. My heart dropped so fast it felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. Her husband smirked, sipping his beer. "That's right. We can't carry you forever. You're not a child. You should be able to take care of yourself, or find somewhere else to live." I wanted to sink into the earth. The neighbors whispered, eyes on me. I could hear the pity and the judgment. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. All I could do was clutch the plate tighter, praying it would stop shaking. When I finally spoke, my voice cracked. "I didn't ask to stay here forever. I just needed time. You're my daughter. I thought family meant something." She rolled her eyes. "Family means not dragging us down. You're just dependent, a burden." That word, burden, burned into my chest. I saw the neighbor's eyes soften, but no one said a word. No one dared challenge her. She pointed to the door. "Pack your things tonight. Tomorrow morning, I want you gone." My knees went weak. The house I once helped her pay for. The home where I raised her. Now I was being erased from it, like I had no place in her life anymore. As I turned away, I caught a glimpse of something unusual. On the kitchen counter, half hidden under some papers, was an envelope with a bank's logo. I saw my daughter's husband quickly shove it aside, eyes flickering with panic when he noticed me looking. Something about that moment lodged in my mind. Why hide it? Why that urgency? But before I could think further, my daughter shoved my suitcase into my arms. Her last words echoed in front of everyone. "From now on, you're on your own." That night, standing on the sidewalk with my suitcase, neighbors watching silently, I whispered to myself, "They think I'm powerless, but they don't know what's coming." My name is Margaret Lewis. I'm 56 years old. And until that night, I believed my daughter Emily was my greatest blessing. I raised her on my own. Her father left when she was only 5. I worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables in the morning, just to keep food on the table. We didn't have much, but I gave her everything I could. I skipped meals so she could have new shoes for school. I stitched my own clothes so she could feel confident at her prom. When she graduated college, I thought all the years of sacrifice were worth it. She was my pride, my reason to live. But life had other plans. 2 years ago, I lost my job at the diner. The owner sold the business. I tried to find new work, but no one wanted to hire a woman my age. They wanted young, fast, cheap. Then came the medical bills. Arthritis in my hands made it nearly impossible to hold heavy things. The hospital visits drained my savings in months. I thought moving in with Emily would be temporary. Just until I got back on my feet. I never imagined she would see me as dead weight. The worst part wasn't the words she used, it was the way she looked at me that night. Cold, detached, like I wasn't her mother anymore, but a stranger eating her food. That's the weakness that crushed me. I had no job. No money, no place of my own, just a suitcase, my aching hands, and a heart full of shame. But something inside me stirred that night, because as I walked away, I remembered something Emily didn't know. Something I had kept hidden for years. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make me believe I wasn't finished yet. After that night, I had nowhere to go. So I dragged my suitcase 3 blocks down the street to a small bench near the corner store. It was the same neighborhood I had helped Emily move into years ago. Ironically, the very place she now treated me like an outsider. The building where she lived wasn't just a house. It was part of a larger apartment complex, a row of brick units owned by a private landlord. Families, young couples, and retirees all lived there. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's routines, where gossip spread faster than the mail. I sat there watching lights flicker in the windows. Some families laughed around their dinner tables. Some couples argued behind thin curtains. Life was happening all around me, but I was suddenly on the outside looking in. The corner store owner, Mrs. Patel, noticed me. She stepped out, her voice soft but concerned. "Margaret, are you all right?" You look lost. I forced a smile. Just a rough night, don't worry. But she wasn't fooled. She handed me a cup of tea and whispered, I've seen the way Emily and her husband talk to you. You don't deserve that. Her kindness almost broke me. I had been holding back tears since the moment Emily pointed to the door, but I swallowed them down. I didn't want pity. Across the street, I noticed a sleek black car parked near the building. Inside, a man in a suit sat watching quietly. He didn't belong to the neighborhood. I would have remembered his face. For a second, our eyes met through the windshield. Then he started the engine and drove away. It struck me as odd. Why would someone sit there, watching Emily's building? Later, I would realize that car wasn't a coincidence, but at the time I was too shaken to think clearly. What mattered most in that moment was survival. I had no home, no savings. But I had one last card to play, something Emily and her husband knew nothing about. I pulled a small key from my pocket. It was old, worn from years of hiding in my drawer. That key opened a safety deposit box. And inside that box was the one secret I had guarded all these years. The morning after my humiliation, I returned quietly to Emily's house to pick up the rest of my things. I didn't want another scene. I just wanted to collect my belongings and leave with what little dignity I had left. But as I reached the doorway, I heard voices. Emily and her husband Mark were in the kitchen. They didn't know I was standing there. She's finally gone, Mark said with a chuckle. About time. I told you, we can't afford to keep her around. Emily sighed. I know, but she's my mother. I still feel a little guilty. Mark's tone hardened. Guilty? She's a leech. And don't forget, if she stayed any longer, she might have noticed the letters from the bank. My heart froze. The envelope. The one I saw him shove aside at the party. Emily lowered her voice, but I still caught her words. What if she already saw something? What if she talks to someone? Mark slammed a cupboard shut. She has nothing. No money, no power. Who would listen to her? Don't worry. By the time she figures anything out, we'll have flipped this place and cashed out. I gripped the door frame so tightly my knuckles turned white. Flipped this place? What did they mean? Then Emily laughed nervously. Well, at least with her gone, we can raise the rent faster. The tenants have no choice but to pay. Mark leaned in, his voice dripping with greed. Exactly. Triple the rent if we have to. And once the contracts are signed, we sell the whole building. That's our ticket out of debt. Debt. So that was the secret. The envelope, the panic in his eyes. They were drowning in money problems and planning to use the tenants to climb out. And me? I was disposable. A mother, erased like a piece of trash, because I stood in the way of their scheme. My chest ached as I stepped back from the doorway. I wanted to storm in, to confront them, to remind Emily who paid the down payment for this very house years ago. But I stopped myself. Because in that moment, I realized something far more powerful. Their betrayal had handed me the very weapon I needed. And they didn't even know I held it. I walked away quietly. My heart shattered, but my resolve hardening. They thought they had won. But soon, Emily and Mark would learn that discarding me was the most expensive mistake of their lives. A week passed. I stayed at a small church shelter across town. Cold nights, thin blankets. Each day I searched for work, but every door closed in my face. Too old, not fit for the position. The same words again and again. I told myself I could endure it. But then came the second blow. One afternoon, I returned to Emily's neighborhood. I wanted to speak with Mrs. Patel, the store owner, to ask about temporary work. But as I approached the building, I heard laughter, sharp, mocking. A group of neighbors stood gathered near the mailboxes. Emily was there, arms crossed, her voice carrying loudly for all to hear. She loves to tell people how much she sacrificed for me, Emily scoffed. But let's be honest. If she had been such a good mother, why did my father walk out on her? Why did she end up broke and alone? The crowd murmured. My chest tightened. Emily smirked, leaning closer to her audience. She wants everyone to think she was noble, but the truth? She ruined her own life with bad choices, and now she expects me to clean up her mess. A few neighbors chuckled, others looked away uncomfortably. I froze in the shadows, my heart pounding. Then Mark chimed in, his voice dripping with venom. No wonder her husband abandoned her. She was always dead weight, and now she wants us to carry her too? Pathetic. The words struck like daggers. They weren't just mocking my present struggles. They were tearing apart my past, everything I had endured, everything I had given. The neighbors gasped as someone finally noticed me. Whispers spread quickly. Emily turned and our eyes locked. For a split second, I hoped she might feel shame, that she might soften, realizing how cruel her words had been. But instead, she smiled coldly. "Oh, look. Speak of the devil. Mom, did you come back to spin your sob story again? Because if you did, save it. Everyone here already knows the truth." Laughter rippled through the group. My knees nearly buckled. I wanted to scream, to tell them the real story, that I had worked myself to the bone, that I had loved her more than life itself. But the words wouldn't come. As I turned to leave, I heard Mrs. Patel's voice cut through the crowd, soft but firm. "Careful what you say, Emily. People who tear down others often have something to hide." Emily's smile faltered for the briefest moment. Mark shot her a warning glance. But the neighbors were already whispering again, this time with suspicion. I walked away quickly, tears blurring my vision. Behind me, their laughter and whispers tangled together, sharp as knives. Yet somewhere beneath the shame, a spark ignited. Yes, they had mocked me. Yes, they had dragged my past through the mud, but I knew a truth they didn't. And soon, when the time was right, that truth would burn brighter than all their lies. That night, I lay on the thin cot at the shelter, staring up at the cracked ceiling. But it wasn't Emily's mocking laughter I heard anymore. It was Mark's voice. No wonder her husband abandoned her. The words pierced deeper than anything Emily had ever said. Because they weren't just insults. They were the wound I had carried for decades. When my husband left, I told myself I was strong enough to survive. I told Emily he was weak, that he didn't deserve us. But alone in the quiet hours, I had always wondered if it was me. If I hadn't been enough. If I had driven him away. Now, hearing those words from my own daughter's lips, I felt the shame I had buried come rushing back. Maybe Emily believed it too. Maybe she had always blamed me. I curled into myself, clutching my aching hands. The arthritis throbbed through every joint, but the pain inside my chest was worse. For the first time, I wondered if my whole life had been nothing but failure. I had given everything, my youth, my health, my dreams, to raise Emily. And still, I was left discarded, mocked as a burden, condemned as the reason her father left. It was almost enough to make me believe them. Tears came hard. I pressed my face into the pillow, muffling the sobs so the other women wouldn't hear. But no one would have cared. In that shelter, everyone was drowning in their own grief. The next morning, I forced myself out. I tried to find work again, clinging to the idea that I could still stand on my own. But my body betrayed me. At one diner, I couldn't lift a tray of dishes. At another, the manager shook his head before I even finished speaking. By the time I stumbled back to the shelter, my chest burned, my vision blurred. I collapsed onto the cot, terrified that maybe this was the end. That night, broken and desperate, I whispered into the darkness. "God, if I still have a purpose, show me, because I can't carry this anymore." And then I remembered the key. The small, worn key I had carried for years without thinking, the one connected to a safety deposit box. I pulled it from my pocket, holding it tight. It was more than metal. It was a reminder. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't defined by the man who left me, or by the daughter who turned her back on me. Somewhere out there, locked away, was proof that my life had meant something. Maybe Emily had stripped me of dignity. Maybe Mark thought I was weak. But they had no idea what I still carried. I wasn't finished, not yet. 2 days later, I finally gathered the courage to use the key. The safety deposit box had been sitting untouched for over a decade. I had almost forgotten what I placed inside. The bank teller led me to a small, private room. The box slid onto the table with a dull thud. My hands trembled as I slipped the key into the lock and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked, were envelopes filled with cash. Years of tips I had saved secretly. A small inheritance from my late aunt, and at the bottom, folded carefully, was a deed. I froze. It wasn't just any deed. It was to the very building Emily and Mark lived in. My aunt had left it to me. Back then, I didn't understand its value. The building had been old, run down, barely profitable, so I tucked it away, too afraid of the responsibility, and never spoke of it again. Now, staring at the papers, my heart pounded. While Emily and Mark schemed to squeeze tenants and sell the place, they didn't even realize they weren't the owners. I was. I laughed through tears, the sound echoing in the empty room. After everything, the humiliation, the nights at the shelter, the whispers behind my back, I held the power they thought was theirs. But then, something caught my eye. Tucked in the corner of the box was a small velvet pouch. I hadn't seen it in years. I opened it carefully. Inside was my old wedding ring, the one my husband had left behind when he walked out of our lives. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my throat tightening. Mark's cruel words echoed again. No wonder her husband abandoned her. But holding that ring, I felt something shift. He hadn't abandoned me because I was worthless. He abandoned me because he was weak, because he couldn't handle the weight of responsibility, and I had carried it alone, for Emily, for years. The shame that had haunted me for decades began to dissolve. I wasn't the reason he left. I was the reason Emily even had a home, a future, a life. I closed the pouch and placed it back inside the box, not with pain, but with peace. That chapter was over. I would no longer let it define me. And now, with the deed in my hands, I knew exactly what I had to do. Emily and Mark thought they erased me. But soon, the world would see the truth. I slipped the papers into my bag, my fingers steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like the foundation. Justice was coming. The deed in my hands was already enough to turn everything upside down. But fate wasn't finished with me yet. The next morning, I went back to the neighborhood. I wanted to see the tenants, those people Emily and Mark planned to exploit. I needed to know if they were already suffering. Mrs. Patel greeted me with a worried look. "Margaret, thank God you're here. You need to hear this." She lowered her voice. "Mark has been going around, telling everyone the rent will triple next month. Some families are already packing. They're terrified." My stomach twisted. Children crying, mothers panicking, people about to lose their homes, all because of Emily and Mark's greed. I knew then that I couldn't stay silent, not just for me but for them. As I spoke with Mrs. Patel, the black car appeared again. This time, the man stepped out, tall, sharp suit, briefcase in hand. He approached me directly. "Mrs. Lewis?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I stiffened. "Yes, who are you?" He opened his briefcase, revealing documents. "My name is Daniel Foster. I represent the bank that holds the mortgage on this property, and I think we need to talk." My pulse quickened. "Mortgage? But this building is mine." I held up the deed with shaking hands. His eyes widened slightly. "That changes everything," he explained quickly. Mark had forged Emily's signature on several loan applications, using the building as collateral without her knowledge. But since the deed was in my name, every loan they signed was invalid and potentially criminal. I nearly gasped. Not only were they drowning in debt, but Mark had committed fraud. If the truth came out, it wouldn't just be financial ruin. It could mean prison. Daniel leaned closer. "Mrs. Lewis, you're the rightful owner. Which means you hold all the cards. The question is, what do you want to do with them?" For the first time in months, I felt the weight shift. The shame, the humiliation, the tears, they all melted into something else. Power. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted. I didn't just want my dignity back. I wanted Emily and Mark to face the consequences of what they had done to me and to everyone else. The stage was set, and I was finally ready to take control. The next time I walked into that neighborhood, I wasn't the same woman they had mocked. Gone was the timid, trembling mother with a suitcase and swollen hands. I wore a crisp navy suit, my hair neatly brushed, my shoulders straight. Daniel walked beside me, briefcase in hand. Heads turned as we passed. Neighbors who once pitied me now whispered, confused. Mrs. Patel's eyes widened in shock, then softened with pride. I stopped right in front of Emily's building. The place she thought she controlled. The place she planned to bleed dry. And I smiled, because it was mine. Emily came storming out, Mark right behind her. She froze when she saw me standing tall, calm, unflinching. "Mom," she muttered, her voice uncertain for the first time in months. What are you doing here?" I met her gaze, steady and cold. "I came home." Mark sneered. "You don't belong here anymore. Get out before I call security." Daniel stepped forward, pulling out the deed and laying it on a clipboard for everyone to see. "Actually, Mr. Davis, she owns this building, which means you don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the crowd of tenants who had gathered outside. Emily's face drained of color. Mark stammered, his arrogance collapsing into rage. "That's impossible. We've been managing this place for years." Daniel's tone was sharp. "And you've been managing it illegally. Forged loans, fraudulent contracts. I suggest you lower your voice, because everything you've done is about to be investigated." For a moment, silence fell. Then whispers erupted among the tenants. People who had feared eviction now looked at me with new hope. I raised my chin. "My name is Margaret Lewis. I am the owner of this building. And I promise you this, no family here will ever be thrown out because of greed, not while I'm in charge." The cheer that followed shook me to my core. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't weak. I was a protector, a leader. Emily's eyes brimmed with something between fury and fear. She had tried to erase me. But here I stood, stronger than ever. And the world finally saw it too. The news spread like wildfire. Within days, every tenant in the building knew the truth. Emily and Mark were never the real owners. I was. Daniel filed the legal paperwork immediately. The forged loans, the false contracts. All of it was turned over to the authorities. 2 weeks later, the police came for Mark. I was there when they led him out in handcuffs, his face red with rage. He shouted at Emily, blaming her, blaming me, blaming everyone but himself. But the crowd only watched in silence. Justice was finally moving. Emily wasn't arrested, but her name was dragged through the mud. Every neighbor remembered her cruelty, her arrogance. No one looked at her with respect anymore. Even the whispers were filled with disgust. She came to me one evening, eyes red, her voice trembling. "Mom, I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please forgive me. Let me stay." For a moment, my heart ached. This was my daughter, the little girl I once sewed dresses for, the one I carried through storms. But then I remembered the laughter, the humiliation, the word burden ringing in my ears. I met her gaze, calm but unyielding. "You threw me out when I had nothing. You mocked me in front of strangers. You forgot what family means. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences, Emily." Her lip quivered. She turned away, shoulders shaking, as the tenants closed their doors to her one by one. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing the community she thought she ruled. As for me, I poured my savings into repairing the building. Fresh paint, safer locks, a community garden in the courtyard. For the first time, the tenants had a landlord who cared. Not someone who saw them as dollar signs. Every morning, children laughed as they played under the trees. Every evening, neighbors greeted me warmly, their smiles filled with gratitude. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, leading, healing. And though Emily's betrayal would always leave a scar, I learned something vital. Being cast out was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of my rebirth. The last time I walked past the spot where Emily once mocked me, I smiled, not with bitterness, but with strength. She had called me a burden, but in the end, I became the foundation. And without me, her world collapsed. Months passed and life settled into a new rhythm. The building thrived. The tenants no longer lived in fear of eviction. Instead, they planted flowers, painted murals, and turned the courtyard into a place of joy. Sometimes, I sat on the bench near the corner store, the same place I once cried with my suitcase at my feet. But now, children waved to me, neighbors stopped to chat, and Mrs. Patel always brought me tea with a smile. I often thought about Emily. I heard she moved to another town, struggling to rebuild her life without Mark. Part of me ached for her, the mother in me that never truly disappeared. But I also knew this. She had to walk her own path, face her own mistakes, and earn her redemption. As for me, I had finally learned the truth I had searched for in my darkest nights. I was never a burden. I was never useless. I was strong, capable, and worthy of respect. The betrayal nearly destroyed me. But in the end, it forced me to rise, to discover a strength I didn't know I had. And now, every time I turn the key to my building, I whisper a quiet promise to myself and to the people who live under its roof. No one will ever feel unwanted here. Not like I once did. That is my justice. That is my healing. And that is my story.